Hi, my name is Joey Coppedge. I'm a fertility nutrition coach, and I help intended parents, just like you, to improve your odds of success with assisted reproductive treatment. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why nutrition matters when you're trying to conceive, and how we can take a look at food as the problem and the solution. Regardless of your sex, your weight, your sexuality, your race, or even your health history, improving what and how we eat can make a big difference in your sperm parameters and egg quality. This not only increases your physician's confidence in your treatment plan, it improves success rates like implantation rates or live birth rates, and reduces the risk of adverse outcomes like gestational diabetes or preeclampsia or miscarriage. First, it's important to point out that our eating behaviors matter more than our knowledge of food does. In a survey of over 100,000 precision nutrition clients on what their biggest nutritional challenge is, not knowing what to eat is nowhere near the top of the list. Rather, what tends to prevent folks from eating what makes them feel good mentally and physically are things like emotional eating, a lack of planning, cravings, eating quickly with distractions, eating when not hungry, and even just overeating. These challenges not only make it hard to achieve the goals that you might have already, they can also lead to certain outcomes like chronic dieting, disordered eating behaviors, or consuming more calories than you're using. Once we have a plan in place to address those behavioral limiting factors, if there are any, then we can focus on the actual food choices. Some of the food choices that have a negative effect on our fertility are things like excessive intake of saturated and trans fats, refined and processed carbohydrates, and foods with low nutritional density or diversity. These dietary characteristics are not only the underlying cause of things like obesity or poor gut health, type 2 diabetes, or insulin resistance, they're also directly associated with oxidative stress, chronic inflammation, and intestinal dysbiosis, or bad gut health, which can lead to decreased sperm and egg quality, adverse clinical outcomes, and hormonal and immunological disorders. And while they present risk to your fertility and your treatment and a healthy pregnancy in general, they are largely preventable. In a 2021 study, men who ate a more Western-style diet, characterized by things like red meat, processed meat, fast food, legumes, refined grains, were 2.5 times more likely to be infertile. This could be one of the many reasons why semen quality has dropped 50 to 60% in the last 40 years. In another study, the risk of female infertility was 66% lower in women who ate monounsaturated fats rather than trans fats, vegetable proteins rather than animal proteins, slow digesting carbohydrates, high-fat dairy, multivitamins, and iron that comes from non-animal sources. It's important to point out that there's no one fertility diet that works for everybody. In fact, sometimes you'll hear conflicting conclusions about the same foods. What will work best for you doesn't have to match what any one study or diet says to do. However, we can set some boundaries so that what we do eat provides all the fuel and raw materials that we need in order to thrive and reproduce. So let's talk about the foods in context of nutrients and how they relate to our fertility. First is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a family of nutrients that, for the most part, will end up broken down into simple sugar molecules called glucose. You might hear this referred to when talking about blood glucose levels. This is our body's primary source of energy, but in the past century or so, processed foods containing large amounts of sugars have made it easier to consume larger volumes of carbohydrates. For example, when wheat is refined down into white flour, the germ and the bran are removed in order to increase the food's shelf life. What's left is the starchy endosperm, which makes flour fluffy and more tasty. But the problem is that the germ and the bran were what contained most of the protein and the folate, B vitamins, carotenes, and other antioxidants and omega-3s. So not only does this strip away what nutrient value the food once had, It also allows the food to be digested rapidly, which affects blood glucose and causes spikes in insulin, which over time can lead to insulin resistance, a hallmark of PCOS and other hormone disorders. In fact, around 70% of women with PCOS are insulin resistant. So managing what carbohydrates we eat and how we eat them is an important first step for that population. In a 2017 study of 340 IVF patients, women who drank even one soda a day compared to those who did not received around 10% fewer oocytes. Of those oocytes, 15% fewer were viable. Of those viable oocytes, around 10% fewer were able to be fertilized. And of those that were able to be fertilized, 23% fewer developed into top quality embryos. On the other hand, carbohydrates like vegetables and whole grains are rich in micronutrients and are a primary source of fiber. In a prospective cohort study from Harvard University, the group of women who ate the most whole grains compared to the least had a thicker endometrial lining, making them more receptive to the embryo transfer. These women had a 32% higher implantation rate and a 51% higher live birth rate. As you can see, we need carbs in our diet because they contain an abundance of micronutrients and are our main source of fiber and energy. To set some boundaries, around 45 to 65% of what we eat should come from carbohydrates. And while the wrong kinds of carbs can cause big problems, others make a huge difference to your fertility, like whole fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes, starches, and whole grains. Let's switch over to fats. Fats in the diet should take up about 20 to 35% of what we eat in total. No more than half of that should be saturated fats, and no less than half of that should be unsaturated fats. Fats in the diet provide us with energy just like carbohydrates do, but it's our secondary source of energy. They help us to make and balance hormones, including our sex hormones. They form our cell membranes, they form our brains and our nervous systems, and they help transport fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. Fats also provide fatty acids that we can't make on our own, one of which is omega-3, which is abundant in fish who get it from algae. Omega-3s play an important role in neurological development and processing and visual acuity, the permeability of cell membranes, the metabolism of glucose, and the calming of inflammation. For men who consumed more omega-3, the odds of having impaired sperm motility were 32% lower. Among men who ate the most fish, total sperm counts increased 64%. For men who ate 3.5 portions of fish per week, sperm morphology was 27% higher. And among men who consumed the most omega-3 fatty acids, sperm morphology was 44% higher. One type of omega-3 fatty acid is DHA, which represents about 20% of the fatty acids that are found in sperm cell membranes. And because these polyunsaturated fatty acids are most susceptible to oxidation and therefore oxidative stress, we need a steady supply for sperm production and fetal development. For women, one study showed that patients who consumed foods rich in DHA and EPA, another type of omega-3 fatty acid, were more likely to have successful assisted reproductive treatment outcomes. In fact, replacing just 1% of any macronutrient in your diet with omega-3 fatty acids increases the chances of live birth by 2.5 times. Even though DHA and EPA are found in green plants, fish and seafood are the main sources of it in the diet. And while fish that are high in mercury are obviously of concern during pregnancy, this list includes fish that are lowest in mercury and highest in omega-3. It's important to point out that omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory, while omega-6, the other essential fatty acid, is a pro-inflammatory. Both are essential immune functions. Omega-6 is involved in the rigidity of cell walls, blood clotting, and in the inflammatory response. It's also involved in fat storage, which is what they do in plants and why seeds are such rich sources of omega-6. This is why it's important to aim for omega-3 rich vegetable oils like extra virgin olive oil and avocado oil and steer clear of seed oils. While we're at it, some good sources of omega-3s that have a high omega-3 omega-6 ratio are flaxseed oil, cod liver oil, herring oil, sardine oil, and like I said, extra virgin olive oil. From fish directly, squid, fish roe, queen crab, cuttlefish, striped bass, wild salmon, from nuts and seeds, flax seeds and chia seeds, from fruit, jackfruit, papaya, mangoes, cherimoya, and even from vegetables. The second main type of fatty acids is saturated fats, which come mostly from land animals and are usually solid at room temperature and should make up no more than half of your total fat intake. That same case control study that looked at the ideal sperm motility in omega-3s also showed that the odds of having impaired sperm motility were around twice as likely for those that ate the most saturated fats. This comes from foods like chocolate, beef, cheese, butter, sunflower, and palm oil. Although saturated fats get a bad rap, whole minimally processed foods that are rich in saturated fat are usually balanced with an appropriate amount of unsaturated fats as well. So any imbalance typically reflects a diet that consists mostly of processed, low-quality foods, which are commonly combined with sugar and refined carbohydrates. In a 2015 case study, they found that the odds of having impaired sperm motility are 85% higher for men who consumed the most saturated fats. Finally, there's one type of fat that should be avoided at all costs, and that's trans fats. In pregnancy, trans fats impact the growth of the fetus and compete with the transport of other essential fatty acids from the mother to the fetus. Trans fats lower good cholesterol, suppress the excretion of bile acids, increase cholesterol production, and create and worsen essential fatty acid deficiencies. The third macronutrient is protein. Proteins are most present in animal meat, but can also be supported by an adequate intake of plant-based choices like beans and legumes. In the diet, proteins are broken down into any of about 20 different amino acids, 9 of which are essential that we can't make on our own. And since the enzymes that digest all of our food come from protein, it's important to get enough to ensure proper digestion and nutrient absorption of all of the nutrients. Proteins should comprise about 10 to 35% of what we eat because they are responsible for the creation and repair of hormones, muscle proteins, neurotransmitters, and immune system chemicals, and even energy. And because we don't have a way to store proteins in the same way that we do fats and carbohydrates, we need a constant, steady supply. We actually need an adequate amount of all 3 of these macronutrients since they serve such unique purposes. And as you can see, when foods are refined or processed, their nutrient value is diminished. This is especially true for micronutrients, which include 13 essential vitamins, 16 minerals, and other plant compounds, because micronutrients are involved in almost every function of the reproductive process. Semen and sperm is all derived from food we eat, proteins, fatty acids, fructose, so it makes sense that the risk of impaired sperm motility was 51% lower for men whose diets were high in vitamins E, D, C, zinc, folate, selenium, fiber, and polyunsaturated fats. Vitamin A plays an important role in embryo development. Iodine is vital for fertilization, fetal brain development, and meeting the hormone demands of the thyroid. Vitamin D is involved in the crosstalk between embryo and the endometrium, in maintaining serum calcium levels, absorption, bone development. And folate catalyzes neurological function, neural tube development, and brain development in a growing fetus. So it makes sense that a 2018 prospective cohort study found that clinical pregnancy rates and live birth rates were 70 to 80% higher among women whose diets were primarily composed of whole foods like fish, nuts, seeds, vegetable oils, whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. It's natural to ask, if so many people are deficient in these key nutrients, can't we just load up on supplements? The reality is that our bodies respond best to nutrients when they're delivered in concert with other nutrients, just like they are whenever we eat whole unprocessed foods. Sometimes nutrient deficiencies are unique to the individual and require supplementing in higher doses, which you can figure out through a simple blood test. And while we should absolutely take high-quality multivitamins and prenatals every day to fill in the gaps, supplements alone won't replace the essential nutrients that we get through food. A meta-analysis of 50 randomized controlled trials concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support antioxidant supplementation in relation to live birth, clinical pregnancy, miscarriage, multiple pregnancy, or other GI disturbances. On the other hand, there are antioxidant supplements that show reliably consistent results like CoQ10 and L-carnitine. while supplements are not the solution, they should be part of the process and part of your preconception routine. So we've talked a lot about food and nutrients and what its relationship is to your fertility. And it's important to point out that food is not only the solution, it's also the problem. Perhaps the most hostile of factors threatening our fertility is oxidative stress. When we eat food, we break it down into its simplest form, its nutrient form. If we use those nutrients for energy, they're converted through oxidative reactions, which actually can be pretty damaging on their own. Luckily, we've evolved a way to counteract and neutralize these oxidative reactions by using antioxidant compounds that we also get from food. But if this happens in excess, if there are too many oxidative reactions and not enough antioxidants, oxidative stress occurs, which can damage the cells and the DNA inside those cells, which is not good if the DNA is the blueprint for functional eggs and sperm. Plus, since most of the fatty acids that make up sperm cell membranes are unsaturated, they're highly susceptible to this oxidative stress. Unfortunately, our Western-style diet is dominated by nutrient-poor foods that are pro-inflammatory, like processed meat, refined carbohydrates, added sugars, saturated and trans fats. These foods are a lot easier to find and cost a lot less money. They're more stimulating to eat because they're made with added sugars and salt and industrially produced fats, which make them really tasty yet unsatisfying, so they're easy to overeat without actually making us feel full. These kinds of foods aren't just devoid of the nutrients we need to survive, they also exacerbate oxidative stress and further cause chronic inflammation. Even though chronic inflammation can be caused by chemicals or autoimmune disorders or infection, it's managed by a healthy and strong immune system, most of which is housed in your gut. And because chronic inflammation is a hallmark of disorders like insulin resistance, PCOS, and endometriosis, it's important to feed and strengthen your gut microbiome and therefore your immune system to support fertility and successful pregnancies. Whether your source of infertility is male factor or female factor has been explained by conditions like PCOS or endometriosis, or medical conditions like varicocele or genetic factors, your fertility can improve significantly with consistent and measurable diet and lifestyle changes. And with accountability partnership like you might find with a nutrition coach, you can sustain changes and build habits that will make you feel confident about your health and the health of your future family. Thank you.